We are live. Welcome to the show. I got a little out of sorts there, and I'm trying to put together this tile for Tyler. And
I'm sure it will be lovely.
it depends on who you ask. It might just rub somebody the wrong way.
Well, that is something I'm accustomed to in my line of work.
Good. Okay. And it's not working, so I'm going to work on this. Well, welcome to the show, everybody. OTAs are over. Mandatory mini camp is underway. The Raiders saw a UFO. Laissez-faire. Thy name is Jacoby Myers. And who will the inductee into Raiderdamus' Hall of Shame be this week on Uncovered on the Undroppables? Let's go, Raiders. Here we go. All right. Welcome to the show, everybody. How are you doing, Tyler?
I'm doing fantastic.
All right. I got my camera in a different setup for right now. Hi.
There you are.
All right. I mean, I'm trying to juggle a whole bunch of things at once, and it's not working. I just didn't. I tried to do too much too late, and it's not working out. But we do have a lot of stuff to talk about today.
We do.
Namely, like I said at the top, OTAs are over and the mandatory mini camps started. We have press conferences to talk about. Anything that you took away?
Just the Harbaugh family in particular, Jim, is famous for a particular saying, and it's that you attack the day with enthusiasm unknown to mankind. That's something Jim Harbaugh is pretty famous for. He tweeted it once, people went nuts over it, and he said it a number of times. And that level of enthusiasm is something I saw from the Raiders players as well as all the coaches. Just enthusiasm, just joy of living, joy of football, just being happy to be there. That's not something I saw from a lot of the team's coaches or players last year. And it's not something I've seen a lot in the last 20 or so years because the Raiders have been pretty freaking awful.
Dismal,
This year, I see a bunch of people who really, really want to be there and people who are really, really into it. And I'm really happy about that. It's just the attitude struck me more than anything they actually said.
Yeah, that's I got the same thing. Everything that they talked about was about buy-in, about energy. They all seem very enthusiastic. They're all like super ready to play. They're a good group of guys. They get along, and and it's all driven by AP. That's it. It's all driven by AP, and that's the biggest thing. We can talk about essentially so Nate Hobbs. He was asked about playing in Patrick Graham's third year as the defensive coordinator. He said that they are off to a fast start. The communication is different. They're communicating. The game speed is different. They're playing fast. They're playing with their hair on fire. And Max Crosby got into that a little bit. One of those things had to do with Christian Wilkins. Now, according to Max, he and Wilkins have essentially and he didn't say this like in these specific words, but it's what I got from it. They have taken the defensive line group and split it into interior and ends, and each one of them is kind of like the leader of that subgroup. And I thought that was an incredible. I've never heard anybody talk like that before. It's always like we follow the group coach or whatever. Nobody's ever been like these two players have, like they take their guys and separate them, and then they all come back together, and then they all come back together under the line coach, and then they all come together under Patrick Gray. It's like the hierarchy is amazing, and it was good to see. Max said Christian Wilkins is a dog. He's the leader of the interior, and Hobbs mentioned that Wilkins is always the first one to the ball, and he said, "I've never seen anyone that big move that fast." He's blown away by Christian Wilkins, and it's all about the energy. It's all about how they bring their lunch pail to the yard, basically.
Well, I have heard actually that in team basketball activities, Christian Wilkins is the best player on the court. That he is at 300 pounds, he's banging inside, he's getting rebounds, he's dunking, he's doing athletic feats unknown to man at his size and speed. He's just one of the most transcendent athletes in the league, as far as I can tell.
Last week, fuck around and got a triple-double.
Exactly. As far as the enthusiasm and the player leadership, a couple of things. First of all, in any organization, culture trickles down from the top. It starts at the head guy, and it goes downward, and everybody buys in or they don't. And AP has had that sort of culture that this is a player-run organization. You guys got to lead this. I'm the head coach here, to sort of run things, but this is going to be about you. Either you take this team to the promised land or you don't. It's not, necessarily going to be my way or the highway, like, some coaches we know. It's always going to be the players are going to take it as far as the players are going to take it. And, John Madden only had a couple of rules: be on time and play like hell. That was pretty much it. The players themselves did the heavy lifting in the 70s with John Madden, and they had an awful lot of success doing so. And I'm hoping that we have a similar level of success like this, because we certainly have the talent for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Getting into that, there was one thing that I noticed. There was one reporter that kept asking each of the players about, they're talking about making the season 18 games and moving the Super Bowl all the way to President's Day. How do you feel about that? And every single one of them said, "Man, I don't give a fuck. You tell me where to be, I'm going to be there. I just want to play football. If it's a practice day, you tell me it's practice, I'm going to go practice. You tell me it's game day, I'm going to go get up for fucking game day." They didn't give a shit about the reporter's question. They don't care about the season. They just go where they're told, and they just do their job. And that was brilliant. I loved the answer from every single one of them.
Well, similarly, if you tell me there's a football game on, I'm going to sit my ass on my couch and watch it.
Right. You tell me where to be, I'm going to be there.
I'm going to be there too. But they asked Jacoby Myers that, and he said, "Listen, they ain't going to take my money. If there's an extra game, I'm going to be in it." And that man is a businessman.
Yes.
We forget sometimes because we watch football as a game, but to those guys putting their bodies on the line, it's a job. It's not the most important thing to them necessarily, like it is to people who buy Raider hats like myself. It's their actual occupation, and they earn money for it, and they deserve to earn money for it. And I just thought that was a pretty refreshing perspective on things.
I love Jacoby Myers. You were with me during the draft, our live show on the Undroppables, and I was mocked because I was talking up Jacoby Myers, and the reporter said the same damn thing. Now, maybe I had a little to drink, and I might have said one of the best slot receivers of all time, and that might have been a misstep. But even the reporter, when talking to Jacoby, acknowledged that people think that he's one of the best slot receivers out there. It's known. And my Undroppables brothers, they were giving me some shit. And you know what? Today I felt vindicated.
Well, Jacoby Myers has proven his worth last year. The Raiders, he had a fantastic year, and I think with more weapons on the field this year and an emerging Trey Tucker, I think he's going to have an even better year this year. We almost made the playoffs with a essentially non-functioning offense, and one of the very few functioning pieces of it was Jacoby Myers. I think with a better game plan and a relative lack of injuries, I think we're going to have a much more successful offensive scheme this year. As long as the defense shows up, I don't see why the Raiders shouldn't make it as far as they want to go.
The only thing I have to say to that is that a lot of times it's easy to identify the teams on the rise, or be able to point to indicators that would signify a team was on the rise. What's difficult is figuring out the teams that are going to fall, because you have confirmation bias from the previous season. So it's like you look at the Dolphins. Mm-hmm. Most people presume they're going to be in about the same place. Most people look at the Chiefs and think the same thing. Most people look at the Bills and think the same thing. So when we talk about when we talk about the Raiders making the playoffs, we've got to jump somebody. Somebody's got to fall because we have to overcome somebody. So the question is, how do you identify the teams that are going to drop back? We know we're going to outplay the Chargers. They're just too 1960s plus, everybody trying to like get in on the same page. Broncos are in a similar situation, although their talent isn't there, so they're not going to hop us. But are we going to be able to overcome the Chiefs? Are we going to be able to overcome a wild card spot like the Steelers or another team like that? So as enthusiastic as I am, I mean, we have to get to the season before we see who's going to fall. So,
well, when in doubt, I like to shit on Ohio. So I'm thinking we're going to jump
Bengals and Browns.
At least the Bengals and Browns, and probably the Steelers as well. I don't see the Steelers being super functional this year. I see the Steelers as being a lot like the Raiders were last season.
And ancestrally, I'm Pennsylvania Dutch, and so that's Eagles, and I feel very comfortable in that. I don't have to root for the fucking Yinzers. So I mentioned in the opener, laissez-faire, thy name is Jacoby Myers. That was my favorite thing, was his entire press conference. Every question, he was just like, whatever, man. That was his response to everything. They asked him about Brock Bowers, though, and he said that Bowers, he loves watching Brock Bowers. Bowers came in ready to work. He's been impressive. Jacoby Myers has been around Rob Gronkowski and Hunter Henry. He's been around some dogs, and he said that Brock Bowers impresses him. And the big thing that he said was that Brock Bowers finishes on every play. Now, we're talking OTAs, and this rookie is finishing on every play. And if you played football, you've heard finish, finish, finish. Finish. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Don't pull up, finish the play. And Brock Bowers is doing it on every single play that he's out there.
Well, the Raiders' sort of MO is to play to the echo of the whistle and not to stop beating up whoever they are beating up until the whistle is no longer audible whatsoever.
Right.
And that's Brock Bowers' style. And anybody who coached at Georgia could tell you that. If you've listened to any press conferences with any of his coaches, you would know this. There was a story from one of the Georgia practices near the end of the season, and Brock Bowers had already finished his full workout, done through his full practice, and at the end, some of the freshman tight ends at Georgia decided they wanted to run sprints, and they wanted to see who was the fastest because they wanted to beat Brock Bowers' time. And Brock Bowers, after having done a full 3-hour practice, came out and beat every single one of them one at a time. He wasn't going to let anybody get the better of him, no matter if he'd already worked out or not, no matter who they were, even on his own team. He was not going to be outworked whatsoever. That's the kind of guy he is. He's a Raider to the core, and I absolutely love it.
That is fantastic. All right. I was kind of going back and forth this week on who my player of the week was going to be, but let's get into that. So my first thought was, and we'll get into this, the Raiders saw a UFO story in a second, but I was thinking that it was going to be Max Crosby because I wanted to talk about the UFO story. And then I watched the news conferences, the press conferences, and I was really, really impressed by one person who has been on the rush with Max in the last month. And I wasn't like, not to say that I wasn't impressed, but uh, I didn't come away from that podcast thinking anything more of this player. But in the press conference that I watched, he said some things. He talked about some things. He answered some questions in a specific way that I was like, that's my player of the week. So without further ado, imagine Slayer, Rain and Blood, Thunder, Raindrops.
Copyright violation.
Okay, imagine that in your head because I can't play it, but that's what should be the bumper behind this. My player of the week, nickel corner Nate Hobbs. All right, now the reason why is because, first of all, he's good. But what did he do this last week to separate himself in my mind from everybody else? He was talking to, he was answering the reporter, and he was forced to talk about himself in a glowing light. He was forced to mention the fact that he is an absolute dog. And the way that he said it was, they tell me I'm a difference maker. He was trying to explain that he is elite, but trying to stay humble enough to not say, man, I'm elite. And then he said, and this is what got me, we got a defense full of bees. He knows he's elite, and we got a defense full of elites. And that was fantastic. Finally, to wrap up the Nate Hobbs praise, it was very telling when he was asked about the relationship that the team has with Antonio Pierce. And sometimes people move closer to the microphone to emphasize what they're saying. And Hobbs did that, and he got up real close, and the microphone started popping. And he said, we trust AP because he trusts us. And that was the big takeaway. The team is looking at AP going, there's an old saying, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's in counseling and teaching. Nobody's going to follow you unless they think that you're on their side. And that's what he was talking about. Everybody, he said that the team is ultimately and totally bought in because they feel like AP trusts them. And when he said, we trust AP, sidebar, they didn't trust McDaniels because he trusts us, because nobody thought McDaniels trusted them. And that's huge. Are we going to the Super Bowl? Are we going to the Super Bowl?
There have been worse teams than the Raiders that have gone to a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
They may not necessarily have won it, but they have gone there. I think of a certain Falcons team that lost to John Elway in the Super Bowl once. Not a great team. Had a couple of really good players, had a pretty good defense. Not a great team, didn't have a great quarterback, but went to the Super Bowl regardless. And you can't say they didn't belong there because they got there. There have been a lot of teams that have had success that didn't necessarily deserve it, and there are a lot of teams that deserve success that didn't get it. The Minnesota Vikings have deserved a lot more success than they've had. And I think the Saints have had a lot more success than they've deserved in their history. I think the Bengals also have had a lot more success than they've deserved in their history, considering how poorly run a franchise they've been for the last 40 years or so. But there have been better teams than the Raiders, better teams than the Raiders that haven't done anything, and there have been worse teams than the Raiders who have done an awful lot. So it really comes down to the fact that the football isn't round and it bounces in weird ways. And so anything can happen in football. It's really like super random. So
there have been some terrible Ravens teams that won with garbage quarterbacks. And even Hobbs said the Giants, they weren't a good, and he goes, and AP was on that team. I just put that together. And it was, that was a pretty cool
arguably
moment.
the best team of all time, the 2007 Patriots didn't win because of those Giants, who a lot of the players that Antonio Pierce won with his Super Bowl were on that team. So, it's a lot about chemistry. It's a lot about scheme, and it's mostly, honestly, about luck. And if you could stay healthy. So, it's football so random. Sports in general are so random, but mostly it's if you're hurt or not, and if you get hot at the right time. How hockey playoffs can show us that. Do you get hot at the right time? Do you have a good goalie? Well, then you're probably going to win.
Yeah, I was being tongue in cheek when I was saying that, and then I could hear an echo in the back of the house from 49er fan. No. All right, we'll see. All right. So thunder, raindrops. All right. Let's go with the Raiderdamus player of the week.
Raiderdamus player of the week is the other star corner on this team, Mr. Jack Jones.
Woo-hoo.
Everything you said about Nate Hobbs being humble is true. I don't necessarily think any of that applies to Jack Jones. Jack Jones is very exuberant. He's very energetic, does not mind necessarily talking about himself. But Jack Jones is the playmaker on defense that we have needed in the secondary for years and years and years. I mean, basically since we got rid of Nnamdi Asomugha for nothing. Jack Jones is a baller. He's a ball hawk. He's a playmaker. He's just one of those. He's a dude. Like, if you know what I'm talking about, he's a dude. Like, he's one of those guys you don't have to worry about. You stick him on an island, he's going to do his job. You put him in zone coverage, he's going to do his job. You do whatever you want to do with him, he's going to do his job. And today, in OTAs, or not OTAs, the mandatory minicamp, he was actually taking reps at wide receiver.
Yep.
Which I thought was interesting. I remember when I was growing up, there was a certain cornerback for the Falcons, Niners, and Dallas Cowboys named Deion Sanders.
Yankees, Reds, and Giants also.
Legend in multiple sports, champion in multiple sports, did everything you could possibly do. But he also, in addition to being probably the greatest cornerback of all time, was a pretty darn good wide receiver and arguably the greatest punt returner of all time. He wore many hats, and the more hats you can wear as a football player, the better. One of the things we've heard from the Raiders franchise for an awfully long time is we want players who are versatile. We want players who can do different things, play different positions. Well, what's better than being able to play cornerback and also wide receiver as well? I don't necessarily know if the Raiders need help at wide receiver, but if you've got a guy who's a game breaker and a guy who can play the position, why not? Why not put him out there? Maybe the guy just needed to blow off some steam, was taking reps at wide receiver, and maybe they weren't taking it too seriously. Maybe he'll never play a snap at wide receiver during the regular season ever. Who knows? Right. But the fact that he was out there doing what he could do for his team shows me a lot. If we had 11 Jack Joneses on defense, we'd be better for it. I mean, that guy is really something special. New England, I think, is kicking themselves for letting a guy like that go. He had character concerns over there. He hasn't shown any of that in Las Vegas. He has found a home. He's found a place where he belongs, and he's found a place where he can flourish, and I'm excited to see him do it.
Yep. I considered him too, because I wanted to talk about the lining up at wide receiver. One thing that's interesting is you and I have been watching football for a very long time, and there have been two-way players in our lifetimes that were fairly prominent guys that would line up. Mostly it was cornerback lining up at wide receiver. And one of the things so this was announcer speak, so I don't know how much it really plays into the realities of the game. But one thing that you would always hear is you have to account for that. So-and-so is going to line up, and so the other team has to defend against that. They have to prepare for that. And if that's just another wrinkle in Luke Getsy's scheme where he shows Jack Jones on a couple plays and everybody needs to kind of like adjust and go, oh, well, we got to be ready for Jack Jones. That just adds another matchup problem for everybody involved. on the other side of the ball, on the defensive side of the ball when the Raiders are playing, and just complicate. They have to spend time talking about that and not focusing on something else that they should be fixing or whatever. And I think that's, maybe he was having fun because it's mini camp, whatever. But it would be really interesting to see if the season gets started and they start lining him up on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, I mean, we've seen his athleticism just in the Chargers game when he made that ridiculous, like, behind his helmet interception and waltzed into the end zone. There's 0.001% of the population who can do anything remotely like that. That is a special kind of God-given athleticism that the vast majority of people just will never possess.
Yeah, Khalil Mack, Jack Jones, me. It's very few.
Well, that goes without saying. Yeah. I think of Jacoby Ford. Jacoby Ford was a guy we drafted out of Clemson who never did a whole lot offensively for the Raiders. Just he couldn't hold on to the ball. But Jacoby Ford is in fact the leader in kickoff return yardage for the Raiders franchise.
Yep.
He found something he could do well, and he did it really, really well for a few years there. And he'll be in the record books for as long as he sticks. But Jack Jones can do whatever Jack Jones puts his mind to, and it's honestly, if you're gonna say we have to account for that, that's about taking up the time of a defensive coordinator, because there's only so many hours in the day and so many hours in the week that you get to prepare for the team you're going to play. And if you take up the defensive coordinator's time for an hour or 2 hours trying to game plan for Jack Jones, a cornerback playing a wide receiver, that's 2 hours he doesn't get to devote to the rest of your offense. Yep. And so that, I think, is the advantage you have, just putting that into the mind of other teams, that this is a possibility.
It is very interesting that you brought up Jacoby Ford, and I'm going to explain why. Because Jacoby Ford was on my mind today too. And it's not like you and I have this Rolodex of every fucking Raider that's ever been on a roster and think about.
We have Espen. We have Espen together.
Think of all of them all the time. But I was reading an article. Now, let me just preface all this. I'm in a charity fantasy tournament. It's called the Scott Fish Bowl. It's an invitation tournament. There's 3,600 teams. All 3,600 teams get split up into leagues of 12. Some people will draft their leagues on MFL or Sleeper or whatever. Some of us go to live drafts and get together with all the people who are there. It's my second year doing it. And one of the unique things about the tournament, besides the fact that it's invite only, so you have to kind of do something to earn your way into it. You have to either know somebody, or you have to play in a satellite tournament, or you have to participate in some of the contests that they run, be part of a random drawing, that kind of thing. You have to somehow earn your way into it. But Scott Fish, who, by the way, was the creator of Devy fantasy football in the 90s, where you start looking at college players and assigning fantasy points to them. He's the one that he's the one that started that. He started the Fish Bowl. He changes the scoring rules every year. For example, every tight end catch is worth a point. Every tight end first down is worth a point. Every 10 yards caught by a tight end is worth a point. And there was another tight end addition. So if you have Brock Bowers on your fantasy team in the Scott Fish Bowl and he catches a first down pass, that's 4 points. He added kick return yards or kick return stats this year. So you get 10 points if you have a kick return for a touchdown, if one of your players has that, and you get 1 point for every 10 yards on kick returns. Okay, so all of a sudden, Rashid Shaheed is being talked about as relevant, whatever. Now, one of the things about the Fish Bowl is once the scoring rules are announced every June, the fantasy community goes into this beehive mode, trying to figure out how the new scoring will apply to player projections and what they did last year and all that stuff. So over on Fantasy Points, which is a really great website, if you're into fantasy football and you have a little Skrilla, go to Fantasy Points, give them some money. They will help you. This writer calculated fantasy points for the Scott Fish Bowl rules for this year and applied it to the 2010 stats to come up with the top 10 players. Number 1 was Danny Amendola. Number 2 was Arian Foster. Number 3 was Darren Sproles. Number 4 was Percy Harvin. And the 5th highest scoring player in all of fantasy football with these rules applied was Jacoby Ford.
He was
wild. Completely irrelevant otherwise. But this scoring system put Jacoby Ford up there. Number 6 was Leon Washington.
I'll tell you what, with the new kickoff rules that Coach McMahon told us about in detail a couple of weeks ago, you're going to see some interesting players get a lot of interesting stats. So
yeah,
I don't know who the Raiders kickoff return is going to be. I would put stock in Dylan Laube.
Yeah.
If I were in your particular league with those scoring rules.
Yep.
But we're going to see a lot of players you wouldn't normally have a second thought about have monster years.
Yeah, especially in that format. So I just thought it was interesting that it's a Jacoby Ford day. Shout out to Raiders legend Jacoby Ford.
Shout out to Jacoby Ford.
All right, moving on in some of the other okay. Zamir White had an interesting press conference. They asked him about becoming a vocal leader, and he said he's having no problem. Like he got really enthusiastic when they asked him that question. He was like, yeah, he loves the running out of the 12 personnel because Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer are both good blockers, and he thought that was going to be a benefit to him. He loves the new system that they're working with. It's a Luke Getsy's zone scheme. And they asked him what the biggest difference was in the team from last year to this year. And he said, it's the energy in the building. And that's huge. We talked about that. That's enormous.
We've talked about that since for months now. Since you and I have been talking, we talked about that particular topic. The energy in the building is just off the charts. There's good chemistry with the players. There's good chemistry with the coaches. There's just, they call it in the corporate world, they call it synergy. And you get a lot of extra production with good synergy as opposed to bad. And I'm happy to see it. The thing about the Getsy system is no matter how awful the Bears were the last couple of years, they were always near the top of the league in rushing. A lot of that was due to Justin Fields being a terrible quarterback and running at the first sign of danger or lack thereof. But a lot of it was they just opened up holes to running backs with ease because they ran a lot of two tight end personnel, and they just made a commitment because they couldn't pass the ball to run the ball as well as they could. So I think Zamir is going to eat. I think Dylan Laube is going to eat. I think Madison is going to eat. I think both the tight ends are going to eat. Everybody's going to eat. But I think if you are putting stock in the Raiders running game, it's looking up.
Yeah. I don't know. Madison is going to be a solid running back, an RB2. He's going to be a solid backup. Laube, I hope, can at some point in the second half of the season kind of take over for Abdullah. If not, make Abdullah a cut candidate late in the season or late in the training camp. They've got weapons everywhere. They've got great defense at every level in the defense. I'm starting to get to the point where I have never been as enthusiastic about a Raiders team as I am going into 2024. And there have been some squads, 2016 and 17, I was really high on. Obviously, around 2001, 2, 3, they were a Super Bowl worthy team. I don't know if I've ever been this excited.
Well, 2016, they probably were as well. If Derek Carr doesn't break his leg, I think they make a pretty deep run.
Right.
As far as, Amir Abdullah is concerned, it's going to be hard to get rid of him because he is one of the better special teams players in the league. I think Laube's going to need to, show a lot to take that spot. But I think he has it in him. I think he can do it. It's just Abdullah is a hard guy to get rid of with these new special teams roles that they have. He's just too valuable a player. But may the best man win. That's what training camp, mini camp is for. You got to see what's going on. I'm with you as far as being enthusiastic about the season, and a lot of Raider fans are as well. And I think a lot of Raider fans are upset that the team isn't getting the sort of respect in the media that they think the team deserves. But the fact of the matter is this: when you, as a neutral observer, look at how you think a team is going to do as far as record goes and how they're going to do in the playoffs, you look at two things and two things only, and that's quarterback and head coach. And the Raiders have unproven commodities at both spots.
Right.
So you can't look at a team like that, no matter how good the defense is, and say this team is going to win 11, 12 games. You just can't and have a, be in good conscience about it. So the Raiders are going to go into this season. It's going to be a prove it season. Antonio Pierce has to prove that he's going to be a successful head coach, and Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew or whoever is going to have to prove that they can win and win consistently. And if they do that, they are going to get respect in the media, as they have always done when they start winning.
We'll get to that in just a second, but I do want to say, I want to backtrack a little bit and say there was a time that I was almost this enthusiastic, and that was 2021 entering the 2022 season, when Rich Bisaccia was not hired and they went out and they got Josh McDaniels. And I'm not blaming Marcus, but I am a follower of Tape Don't Lie and the Mark John NFL. Go find him on Twitter. And he had some videos that were talking about the way that Derek Carr ran option receiving routes, the fact that Devontae Adams was good at that, and he showed a lot of the Patriots scheme and the fact that that fit with Derek Carr. And then McDaniels came in and imploded. I was excited because I did want to see, they were coming off a playoff appearance, and all they had to do was just kind of like rally the troops and insert a system, and he torpedoed everything. So that's not going to happen this year, which leads to more excitement on my side. Okay. Secondly, you brought up Dylan Lobby. Would you believe I've been DMing his agent?
Really?
And got the email of his PR girl, and was told to get in touch after minicamp so that he could come guest on the podcast. I just broke that shit.
That would be so cool.
Dylan Lobby on this show.
Because, I mean, there were a lot of Raider content creators and podcasters like us who were talking about Dylan Lobby to the Raiders a long time before the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was definitely a guy who was on our radar.
We got receipts.
Yeah, collectively as Raider Nation, we pinpointed this guy. We said this guy would fit our team.
I should put together a reel.
And turns out he did fit our team, and we drafted him, and I could not be happier.
Yes, I am so excited. His agent was so nice. Like, I took a shot. Like, I couldn't even DM him. I just tagged him in a tweet, and he was like, he followed me and was like, hey. I also think his agent is Anthony Weiner's little brother.
I have seen a number of podcasts and interviews that Lobby has done, and I've watched him on YouTube over the past few weeks. He's not necessarily a guy that you can't get an interview with. He's not super hard.
That's why I took a chance.
He's not hard to reach. He'll talk to anybody, and he'll talk to a bunch of nobodies like us. So that'll be fun.
That's why I took the shot, and we shall see. I'm trying to line it up, but it's definitely in the works. Okay. Finally, to wrap up OTAs and mandatory minicamp, the quarterback competition. All right. So it was Nate Hobbs who said that AOC was throwing balls that he forgot that he had in him. He's done a lot of work this offseason. He's come back and he's ready. But he kind of indicated the competition will be down to the wire. We're not going to know anything for quite a while.
Yeah, and that's okay, because that's what preseason is for. That's what training camp is for. The important thing that I'm getting out of this is nobody is cratering. Nobody is looking like absolute garbage. If you have two guys who are pretty darn good, and one of them is just slightly better than the other, that's great. Then you have a good starter and a good backup. Because last year we had a bad starter and a rookie backup, and we still almost made the playoffs with that. So the outlook is up if we have both guys playing well.
And I will reiterate, I believe I talked about this last week. It could have been another podcast, but I think I talked about it last week. Reports from OTAs were saying that O'Connell was throwing the ball with more power than he had last year, and he's very accurate. Gardner Minshew was asked about O'Connell, said he's very accurate. And then I saw like Twitter posts and stuff that were talking about Gardner Minshew not being as accurate. He's a dog, and I don't want to take anything away from Minshew, but I just feel like arm-wise, AOC is a better quarterback, and that will play out. Okay. Moving on to our top story. Max Crosby was on the Jim Rome show. That's a name I've not heard in a long time. It has been years since I have listened to Jim Rome. I wasn't a clone, but there was a lack of stuff to do if you're in the car with terrestrial radio at 11 in the morning. So I listened to my share of Jim Rome talk. Crosby appeared on the Jim Rome show, and this is I'm pulling this one from Sports Illustrated, Andy Nesbitt. He told a wild story about seeing a UFO on a team flight on the way home from a game in Miami. He and Andre James share the story from the flight. Quote, "It's real," Crosby said of aliens. "We were literally on a flight back from Miami, and we've seen a UFO with our own eyes. And that sounds crazy, but you can ask the pilots, anybody that was there. It was wild. And I seen it. And they had no idea what it was. There was nothing on the radar. Nothing. And it was like a big shining light going in and out." So here's the question. Unidentified flying object or alien supernatural power that has now blessed the Raiders?
Well, the Raiders are always blessed, no matter how they do. I will say I did hear that story that he told that story on the Rush with Andre James as the guest, so I'd already heard the story straight from the horse's mouth before the Jim Rome show. Jim Rome is awesome. He always had the best callers because he had a policy: have a take and do not suck. So he didn't tolerate any nonsense from the people who called in on like a lot of talk radio and sports, or from him either.
From Chris Everett.
But the fact is this: last year there were congressional hearings held in Washington about this very topic because so many thousands and thousands of commercial and military pilots had seen unidentified flying craft and had no actual way to report it. They just told it to their superiors and it went nowhere. There was no system for reporting. There was no repository for reporting. So they had congressional hearings about how do we deal with this topic. And it came up that there were a lot of crafts that were showing up above military installations or during military exercises, and the military had absolutely no answer for it. They couldn't chase it away. They couldn't deal with it. They couldn't fire upon it. They couldn't do anything except watch them. And frankly, that's pretty freaking frightening. So if you have no way to report that to your superiors and no way to get it out to the public either, then there's going to be a problem. So I see why they had to, take that into consideration. But there have been, the biggest alien thing that we've seen is from Roswell in the 1950s, and we still don't know what the heck happened there. And there have been alien sightings for probably the last 70 years. The Battle of Los Angeles was during World War II, and the U.S. Army opened fire on a bunch of UFOs over the city of Los Angeles, and we have no idea what happened there either. So this is not a new thing. This is not a special thing. This has been going on for a very, very long time.
Right. I don't want to dismiss the idea of alien biologics. I will say, however, there's a difference between not being able to identify an object in the sky and actual extraterrestrial biologics. I don't doubt that many people have seen things that they could not explain. There are millions and millions, tens, hundreds of millions of Americans who don't know what they do see. And, and so without dismissing it, you know, it's Occam's razor. The most likely explanation is probably the correct one. if I'm a pilot, even if I'm in the military and I see something that I don't know what it is in the sky, it's more likely or more probable that it's a project that I don't have the security clearance for, or my superior doesn't have the security clearance for. Nobody that I can report to has the security clearance for. Nobody's talking about it. Nobody's gonna talk about it. So the report is gonna stop at a certain point. That feels more likely to me than all of the potentialities of alien life forms that are sophisticated enough to make it here and don't contact us, just observe. That makes less sense to me. That's me, and that's not what this show is about. But discourse is what makes the world go round. All right.
Well, I will say this. The last thing I want to say about that particular topic is this: the SR-71. Its first flight was December 22nd, 1964, which means it had been in. I'm talking about the SR-71 Blackbird, Lockheed Martin.
Yeah. Out of Beale Air Force Base, Oroville,
California. It had been certainly in development since the 1950s. Now, if you showed somebody in 1957 the SR-71 Blackbird, what the hell are they going to think it is?
Right.
And shortly after that, we created the stealth bomber and the stealth fighter. You show somebody in 1971 the stealth fighter, what the hell are they going to think it is? Right. Now, those things were created 50 years ago and later. What on earth do they have now?
Right. Not to mention like light reflecting off a weather balloon, or like sunlight hitting something and
gleaming gas, or whatever other excuse they have for whatever they don't want to tell us about.
He wore an Edgar suit. Okay. Raiders are the men in black. It is time. I know all of you are on pins and needles for the reveal. Oh, you know what?
What's that?
I got ahead of myself. Okay, I mentioned in the show notes the best players of all time. I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it.
Okay.
So last week we drafted 4 players each. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to have us each week nominate 1 player each for the 22-headed Mount Rushmore of the Raiders. Or something. We're going to talk about an all-timer. This year, or this episode, let's talk about our all-time defensive line. Let's each give one, and we'll start with you.
Okay. All-time defensive line, I'm going to have to go with probably the best defensive lineman in the history of the Raiders, Howie Long. Drafted out of, not a football school necessarily, Villanova University.
That's the street I grew up on.
It's a great basketball school, but it's not known for football. But Howie Long came from there. Howie Long carved out a great football career. Howie Long went on to star in TV and movies, and now is on the Fox NFL Sunday and is still as famous as ever. His kids have played football. He's had a fantastic life. God bless you, Howie Long.
Absolutely. He's on my short list. Top 3 for me. Number 3 right now is Max Crosby. Number 2 is Howie Long. My number 1, I've talked about him on the show before. I'm going to talk about him again. I'm going to keep his legacy alive. He was Howie Long's backup at defensive end in the late 80s. Ran afoul of Al Davis and was subsequently cut. Landed with the Cleveland Browns. Couldn't get over his injuries. Came back home to this little hamlet, bucolic town of Davis, California. And I'm talking about number 90, defensive end, Mike Wise. Now, this guy came out of Novato, California, which is where I was born, and Jared Goff as well. and I want to say Mike Morosky. So quite a few really, really great football players, and also Mike Morosky and Jared Goff. And he came to UC Davis. UC Davis at the time was in the midst of a 30-year run of conference championships behind head coach Jim Soker. They put out NFL players like Bo Eason, safety for the Oilers, Ken O'Brien, Jets quarterback, among others. And they lost in the Division II national championship, but they were Division II. But the thing about it was that not only were they Division II, they were non-scholarship. They had 0 scholarships. So any player that came to Davis came for academics, and they were real student athletes. So Mike Wise comes over, sets conference records for sacks in a career, sacks in a game, had 7 sacks against Cal Poly one year. Just an absolute force. And as a Division II defensive and at 6'7", 290, he was drafted by the Raiders. I want to say it was the 5th round. Had a house on the golf course, and so my buddies and I would be out there 14 years old just fucking around, and one day he was out on his balcony, and I was like, "Hey Mike, go Raiders." And he's like, "You guys want to drink a beer?" I'm 14. I'm not going to say no. So we go in and we're drinking beers with my favorite Raider, my favorite player, a guy I've been watching since I was 9 years old. 8 years old, 9 years old. Anyway, so we drank a beer with them, partied, eventually like went over there a couple more times. And that's when I found out that he liked cocaine, and so did I. Eventually CTE, steroids, drug addiction, alcoholism got the better of him. And one day he decided that he didn't want to be around anymore. And so now we just have the memories of Mike Wise. He is my Mount Rushmore defensive lineman.
Well deserved too. Sounds like he was an exciting guy to be around.
It was incredible. He was like a human monster, and just super nice. Anybody who wants to know more about him, just Google Mike Wise, LA Times. There's a really, really good article about his life, and it's pretty cool. All right. So now what you've all been waiting for, the reveal. We're talking about Raiderdamus's induction. Who is the nominee this week for your Hall of Shade? Oh, wait, sorry. Raindrops, thunder, raindrops. No.
Slayer.
Hall of Shade. Who is it this week?
Well, I will reveal in my statement that I prepared. Let me begin. For over 60 years, 4 teams have been inextricably bound together as foundational members of the AFL and today as the AFC West. 3 of these teams have combined to win 10 Super Bowls. The other team has 1 Super Bowl appearance, which resulted in a blowout loss, and are arguably the most profound disappointment of a team that exists in the NFL and not named the Atlanta Falcons. The team of which I speak was first represented by a horse and is now represented by a lightning bolt. This is fitting because this particular team is a lot like a racehorse who was winning the race and then got struck by lightning just before the finish line and died. I am speaking, of course, about the San Angeles Chargers of South Central Milpitas. When people consider success in the sports realm, they often ask themselves, what does success mean? What does it look like? Is it wins? Is it championships? Is it individual or team accolades? The Raiders' definition of success is clear, as they proudly show off their 3 Lombardi trophies and have the motto, just win, baby. There is no ambiguity here. Success is winning. The Chargers have done plenty of winning over the years and ultimately have nothing to show for it. If they gave out championships for tripping over your own dick, the Chargers would have a full trophy case. In the 1970s, the Chargers had an amazing offense with Dan Fouts at quarterback and Don Coryell at head coach and Kellen Winslow at tight end, and they never won shit because their defense was non-existent. In the 90s, the Chargers had a strong defense led by Junior Seau and Leslie O'Neal, but they had an atrocious offense. In 1994, when everything came together, they ran into the 1994 49ers in the Super Bowl and were executed on national television in the Super Bowl. In 2010, the Chargers had the best offense and the best defense in the NFL, but they didn't win because they had the worst special teams unit the league has ever seen. If the Chargers were smart, they would embrace their lovable loser persona and become synonymous with their community, as shitbag teams like the Browns and Jets have done. But the Chargers did not do this because the Chargers are, above all else, hopelessly stupid. They left arguably the nicest city in the U.S., San Diego, to go to the worst city in the world, Los Angeles, and be a homeless team that nobody cares about, all to capitalize on a television market that doesn't want to watch them. As an Oregon Ducks fan, I was heartbroken to see Justin Herbert drafted by this phantom team that barely exists, because I knew the Rose Bowl win that capped Herbert's college career would be the last meaningful game he would ever play in Los Angeles, and would be the last time he'd ever appear in a bowl that didn't have the word pro in front of it. Just like this team has wasted the career of every great player who ever donned the powder blue, they also currently waste the finest social media team of any franchise in the NFL. These visionary artists that work for the Chargers are wasted because nobody ever searches online for the Chargers unless they need to plug in their phone to the wall. The Chargers are an utter waste of time, which is why it's a blessing that they only have one fan whose name is Steve. Don't believe in that lady in the Chargers jersey who was cheering at the Cowboys game last year. She's an obvious industry plant who couldn't even tell you who Lance Allworth was. I know she's not a real fan because nobody has ever purchased a Chargers jersey on purpose. Chargers, you sit on a throne of lies, like an obviously fake mall Santa. Nobody believes in you. Nobody loves you. The media gets excited about you every year, only to write what went wrong articles by mid-December, like a kid who asked Santa for Fallout 4 and instead got Fallout 76. Because that's what you are, Chargers. You're the Fallout 76 of football teams. You're No Man's Sky. You're John Romero's Daikatana. You're Custer's Revenge for the Atari. You're a dollar store facsimile of what a football team should be, something grandma buys when she doesn't know any better. You suck, and when you move to somewhere with more fan interaction like Boise or Santa Fe or the Andromeda Galaxy, nobody will shed a tear for you, and your reign of clown fraudulence in associating yourself with more successful Los Angeles teams will be over. Nobody likes a liar, and nobody especially likes a liar who can't back it up. And that's why you, Chargers, are this week's inductee into the Hall of Shade. Fuck you, Chargers.
Absolutely. Firing on all cylinders. that was incredible. Well done.
Thank you very much. I put a lot of heart and thought and soul into that because I really hate those motherfuckers.
The San Diego Chargers of Los Angeles of Irvine. How much you want to bet I can shoehorn UC Davis into here?
I think your all-time team is just going to be guys from Davis and people you serve pizza to.
Barefoot kicker, Rolf Benerschke. He had a porn stash, kicked barefoot, and was the Chargers kicker from 1977 to 1986. And
I thought he had a bunch of magazines. I didn't realize he meant mustache.
No, he went to UC Davis, and also he is now 69 years old. Nice.
All I can think of when I think of UC Davis is that video on YouTube about the the Jets draft blunders. With the 23rd pick, the Jets select quarterback Ken O'Brien, and everybody boos because they wanted Dan Marino.
Right. Even though Ken O'Brien was a good quarterback.
Ken O'Brien was fine. He just wasn't Dan Marino.
Right. All right. Everybody go to Underdog Fantasy. Use the code Undroppables. They'll match you first time deposit of $100. Play some games. It's fun. Win some money. I've been winning money for the last 3 or 4 months. It's been good. And that's even before all my best ball teams go and win. It is the easiest way to play fantasy football. You just draft your team and forget about it until you start getting deposits into your PayPal. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you, Raiderdamus, for the Hall of Shade. I think that this segment is going to go places, and I'm working on the other ones. I have an order in for graphics and stuff with our Undroppables design team. I just need a template that somebody else makes that I can just change the picture every week and streamline that. But we're gonna bounce, get out of here. We will be back next Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. If you're new to the show, go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell. So you'll know when we drop, and share it around and all that stuff. Also, if you're watching this and it's not Tuesday night, hey, check us out live next week. And other than that, you got anything to say?
Fuck the Chargers, man.
Yeah, we will have God damn it. We will have the mini camp wrap up next week. And as I say every week, fuck the Broncos. But you know, you gotta divvy up the hate. Fuck the AFC West except for the Raiders. Fuck all you guys. Peace, everybody.